All right. Well, thanks for coming. My name is Phil Grimes. Everybody knows me as the Grape Ape. I am a exploit developer and vulnerability researcher with Securicon. I find it amazing that people actually pay me to break stuff. But I get to do a lot of really cool things. Unfortunately, most of the fun stuff I get to do, I don't ever get to publish. I do a lot with the government and private space, things that have quite a long statute of limitations. So you'll see in both this talk and in my CSURF talk tomorrow that I tell a lot of stories. I like to talk about things that are a little bit older just because most of the cool stuff that I actually do, I can't talk about for quite a while after. So today I'm talking with you about physical penetration testing. Basically, I love to actually break into stuff. And the fact that we spend a lot of time securing the digital assets. It's easy to wrap controls around the bits and the bytes. It's easy to work on how to secure the intellectual property. But as we saw earlier in the presentation with Mike, the users are a weakness. And we also don't necessarily think about not only what the users are touching and how they're affecting, but the physical controls in the building structures, the locks, fingerprint scanners, retina scanners, all this stuff that we're wrapping around the controls. So what's to stop an attacker from just walking right in, plugging into a jack, and stealing stuff off our network? So today I'm going to share with you a few stories of some physical pen tests that I've been on, some things that I've learned from others in the field. And the idea is hopefully when you walk out of here, you're going to start to not only change the way you think, but you're also going to share with other people the stories that I've told you so that the light bulb's going to go on and they're going to think, holy cow, we need to do something different. So who am I? Well, in the physical world, I wear a lot of different hats. I have been studying martial arts since I was a kid. I've done everything from taekwondo, several different styles of karate, aikido, hapkido, judo, jiu-jitsu, you name it, and I've touched it. Wrestling in high school, I just have always found that one-on-one contact it takes us back to the primal instincts of humans. And martial arts is great. I find martial arts to really give a lot of basis for self-control, self-respect, learning how to respect others, learning how to respect your surroundings, situational awareness. But in every style that I've gotten to study, there's also been some significant differences. For example, taekwondo is a highly motivated striking art, a lot of feet use, a lot of kicking. Which is great. That gives you a lot of physical use. It gives you a lot of training on your body. It also teaches you that physical level of control. But conversely, something like Aikido, which is extremely different because they never even teach you really how to ball a fist. You never throw a strike. It's more in how to manipulate the human body to do what you want it to do. So as an attacker comes at you, how can I move to manipulate their joints? How can I use their momentum against them? It's a lot of circling, a lot of movement around, and how to manipulate an attacking fighting system, manipulate those techniques to your advantage as the defender. I'm also a pirate by blood. My sister actually recently did a thing on that Ancestry.com. She traced our lineage way back to we do actually have some pirate blood from an Irish pirate, I believe, from the 1500s. So it kind of fits along with my choice of career, my personality, the type of guy that I've turned out to be as I've grown into a man. I'm a biker by choice. I love to ride. It really is some of the most fun that you can have with your clothes on. It's also much cheaper than therapy. I really enjoy it. I'm actually the president of a chapter of an international motorcycle club here in the state. And it really gives me an opportunity to bond with people of like minds that like to get out and ride and have a lot of fun, but also come from various backgrounds, from law enforcement, military, we got doctors, lawyers, all kinds of people. And that really helps with understanding different personalities and how they interact with each other. I'm also a parent by the grace of God. I have 5 awesome kids at home. I started quite early. Actually, I'm proud to say that my oldest just turned 18 earlier this year, so I've officially raised my first adult. She's not in jail. She has no kids yet, so she's done much better than me. And we all know, anybody, who else in here is parent? Kids? Anybody? Oh yeah, good. So you all know that being a parent is really one big social engineering experiment anyway. And I am a hacker by nature. I've been a hacker since I can remember. My first experiment, I think, was in elementary school when I took apart my mom's alarm clock to figure out how to make that annoying beeping go off so early in the morning. I just wanted to stop that. Needless to say, she wasn't so happy when I couldn't put it back together correctly, but that's okay. So that's me in a nutshell. I love to break things, I like to make things, and I just like to raise a little ruckus whenever I can. So hopefully I can share some of my experiences in the physical realm, and all of these things really play into what makes me effective when I get to profile and attack a physical target. Of course, in the digital world, I am the Grape Ape. I'm on Twitter almost more than anything else, so if you want to engage about anything you hear me talk about over the next couple days, please feel free. I'll be around. I love to talk about this stuff, so don't hesitate. I like to be social. So I want to take you back in history a little bit. Who's ever heard of the Maginot Line? A couple people in here. So World War II, right? In World War II, France, the Minister of War, his last name was Maginot, and they came up with this idea to build what was then called the Maginot Line along France's border with Germany. And this was really a modern marvel of architecture at the time. It had a bunch of different defenses, machine gun posts. It had soldier housing, which actually included dining areas and even air conditioning, which for the 40s was pretty impressive. Tank obstacles, and a bunch of different concrete fortifications along this line. There was another one that was built along the border of France with Italy, which was called the Alpine Line. And this was really an amazing thing to happen in the 1940s. So much so that dignitaries, politicians from all over the world came to visit this thing because ideally it was supposed to stop any attackers trying to cross those borders. They modeled this after World War I when they learned that static defenses were really able to help France stay alive during the war. The only thing they didn't realize was the dynamic of war had changed from World War I into World War II, and we quickly realized that static defenses stopped working. And unfortunately, we still see that paradigm today when we're talking about how we protect our physical assets. So while this was supposed to be impervious to most types of attack, right? Tanks couldn't manipulate the concrete embankments. They couldn't get around a lot of this stuff. And France was ideally trying to have a way to buy themselves some time. So if Germany tried to invade through this line, that they would be able to mobilize their defenses in time to respond appropriately. The only problem with this was the line stopped. So the Maginot Line, right? You have France and Germany, and then there's Switzerland on one side and Belgium on the other side here, right? Well, the line stopped at Belgium and Switzerland. So Germany just went through Belgium, which had no defense barely, and we saw within 6 weeks, right? So on May 10th, 1940, Germany invades Belgium. And then June 14th, roughly 6 weeks later, Paris falls. So those static defenses, everything that they put those millions of dollars in that day and age, all of those defenses were totally circumvented. We just walked around the fence. And again, that's what we see so often today, that we put time and money into how are we going to put a better lock on our door that we don't necessarily realize. If you look back at the doors here even, you can see, although the locks don't really matter in this case, but the doors right here have a little bit of a gap through them. So if there was a traditional latch lock, it's nothing to slip a piece of metal back in there and slip the lock and I walk right in. Those types of defenses that we put so much trust in because it's what we know failed to work. And we see examples of that back to the 1940s. So we talk a little bit about the 3 Gs, the guards, guns, and gates. Oh my. So this stuff is cool. I recently had an opportunity to go to a restricted area that was like something out of a Die Hard movie. Guys riding around in armored cars, walking around with machine guns. I mean, this was a surreal experience. But what we quickly learned by seeing this place was these traditional defenses don't work. Yeah, it's great to have a guy with a machine gun and a bulletproof vest guarding your door, but if he thinks that I'm supposed to be there and I can social engineer him into letting me get somewhere where I shouldn't be, that entire system starts to crumble. We start to see cascading failure. The problem becomes human nature, right? We heard earlier today that people are the weakest link. Well, that tends to be true, especially when we've got these doors locked, but if you're holding the door open for me while I walk right in with what you think is a donut box, but is really a box of explosives, the system crumbles. People don't stop to ask questions. They don't want to ask somebody who may look intimidating or may be above their pay grade. For example, I'm a pretty imposing guy. I stand 6'5", 260 pounds, right? To a smaller statured person, they're not going to want to walk up to me and say, hey, where are you supposed to be? Why are you here? Can I see your ID badge? Most of the time, they're like, oh, I don't see nothing. Just let that guy go. You never know, right? People don't want to ask questions. They don't want to risk having confrontation because you don't know what the response is going to be. Or on those rare occasions when I've done these type of experiments wearing a suit, I just get on my cell phone and pretend like I'm talking to the CEO. You're not going to want to stop me if I'm able to have your job just by saying, well, this guy's not letting me in. And that actually has worked in the past to where you'll see, I'm sorry, I can't let you in. I don't want to let you tailgate. Well, sorry there, Mr. CEO, but I'm sorry, what was your name? John Smith here says he's not going to let me in, so I guess I'm not going to be able to make our meeting. Well, John quickly will change his mind a lot of times because we don't raise that situational awareness. We don't tell people that they need and want to ask questions. We don't make them hold the people accountable that are trying to get around our physical countermeasures. Now, our guards usually become the first line of defense, but the problems that we found with guards too many times, anybody ever seen a guard sleeping on the job? Yeah? So not only that, but they just don't, they're so complacent, they're so comfortable with the fact that they sit in the guard shack all day long, watching TV, listening to the radio, playing their Xbox or whatever, and they don't have to do anything. So they don't think that something is going to happen. I work for maybe a small utility. Nobody really wants to get into CR corporate data. Nobody's targeting us. Well, it can happen. It does happen. And when those first lines of defense start to fall, when complacency and what they think they know starts to take over the actual role of you need to be protecting my stuff, then guys like me will tend to get in. Circumventing the guard is one of my favorite points in this whole talk. And this is the one story that I really hate to tell the most because it kind of makes me feel bad for about a second. I was on the West Coast doing an assessment for a fairly large company, and it was a utility. And the structure was such, so you have like the corporate offices were in the middle of the campus. On one side of the campus was the parking lot where the employees were. On the other side of the campus is like their garage where they had their work trucks and where restricted people were able to get in. So, I did a little profiling of the site before I got there, checked them out on Google Maps, and when I got into my rental car from the airport and I drove up to the parking lot, I was greeted by a gate and a guard with a nice big gun on his side. And I didn't skip a beat. I said, hi, I'm here to meet someone. I didn't even know the employee's name that I used. It was somebody I wasn't really supposed to meet, but again, I'm testing to see if they're going to let me in, right? So I'm here to meet this John Smith. I need to get in, and we have a meeting here in about 10 minutes. If you just let me park right there, I'll help myself in. So, well, if you're here to meet an employee, you shouldn't park in this lot. You should park on the other side. So the guard told me to drive from the gated, protected lot to the other side of the building where the work trucks were. I was able to park my car, get out, and walk, I kid you not, less than 30 yards. I had access already to a work truck. They were unlocked, I checked. But more important than this, a garage bay that was wide open. Nobody around, so I just walked right in. I walked into the garage bay, I see a pallet full of machines that they were getting ready to recycle. Continue my way, just funneling through the garage, try to see what I can see. I'm a curious guy by nature. I want to know what's in here. Can I get any further? Well, yeah. So within probably 3 minutes, I was walking through the corporate office of this utility. So I took my clipboard, got a piece of paper, and I just start jotting down notes. I'm taking notes on my findings along the way. Was that a question? I'm sorry. I thought I saw you raise your hand. No, I'm hallucinating already. So I start walking around, and again, I want to see what else can I see? What more can I find? So I'm just walking around. I see unprotected network jacks. I saw a couple of machines that were unlocked, so I plugged a USB key in and left them a present. So I'm wandering around, and it's shortly before lunch. I'd spent almost 3 hours just wandering this facility. Not one person asked me what I was doing. Not one person stopped to ask for an ID. Not one person stopped me to ask who I was there to see or why I was there. Never seen me before. And really, the count of the employees in the actual building, it wasn't so big that they wouldn't recognize an unknown face. So there's a problem there. I decided, I'm getting hungry. Rather than leave, I already got myself in. I'm going to go and see if they have a cafeteria here. So I start walking, and as I'm walking to the cafeteria, I see my site contact walking out towards me. And he kind of looks for a minute, and he just drops his head, and he knew. So I tell him the story. I explain it to him. I showed him my notes. I showed him the couple of pictures that I took. I told him, hey, I've already dropped a Trojan on one of your workstations. It wasn't locked. So he asked me, well, how did you get to this garage bay? Well, the guard told me where it was. So he said, come with me. We walk upstairs, top level, corner office. Big CEO on the door. I think, this is either going to be really good or really bad. And he asks me, he introduces me to the CEO, we shake hands. He said, I want you to tell him the same story that you told me. So I did. I like to tell stories in case you can't tell. So I tell the guy how I got here, what happened, and he said, well, you two come with me. So we go down and we go to the guard shack, and he asked the guard, did you see this guy? Yeah. Did you tell him to park over here? Well, yeah, he said he was here to meet an employee. Fired him on the spot. Now, that's the part that makes me feel bad for about 2 seconds, right? But then if you take into consideration the fact that this utility, I could have done some significant damage to some homes on the West Coast by my level of access just with what I've gotten. I mean, it would have been like a scene out of a Batman movie with things that I could have done if I weren't one of the good guys. So we have to change the way of thinking. We have to avoid allowing the people that we work with to be complacent. We have to realize that physical controls matter just as much as our technical controls, and we have to be sure that we're reviewing them, we're devising policies that stop things like this, and we're enforcing these policies. But how? How, you ask, do we protect ourselves? Well, the first problem here is that we protect usually only what we know. And a real significant issue is most of the time we don't really know ourselves well enough to be protecting the entire picture. We all see a little figment of the organization through the eyes of our business unit, but we don't always look at that from a bigger picture. Why not? Well, because that's somebody else's job, right? But most of the time, they're just making sure that all of the little individual units are secure and not necessarily realizing that playing on a minor vulnerability over here can spiral out of control to basically administrative or unrestricted access over here. You'd be amazed what people will do and how many questions will not be asked when somebody's simply walking around with a clipboard or a folded up piece of paper is like magic in businesses for some reason. You fold that piece of paper up, I walk around with a determined look on my face like I know I'm supposed to be here, like I belong here. Go ahead and ask me, I dare you. They're not going to do it. It's amazing to see this. And the problem is because we don't take the time to really truly know ourselves. And who in here does threat modeling for your organization? Or knows that your organization does threat modeling? I see one hand. How about surface mapping? understanding what surfaces may be attacked? None, right? How about trust mapping to know whether the left hand and the right hand should be working in conjunction? I see a lot of, oh yeah, that's probably a good idea, but no hands. That's a problem. These are the kind of things that we need to be changing. If we don't know ourselves, how are we going to be able to protect it? If we don't know what our holy grail is, how are we going to stop somebody like me from coming in and taking it? It's almost impossible. We protect what we see, and most of the time we have those blinders on to where we're not paying any attention to anything other than what's our responsibility. When we've all heard the saying, it takes a village, right? So we all have to play an equal role in realizing that we're not always covering all the bases. These are the kind of things that we have to fight against, especially when we're talking in the physical realm. It's so easy for us to say, yeah, I have GPOs that are covering myself digitally. I have policies in place for my BYOD. I have policies in place for acceptable use. I have policies in place. I even bought hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of software for monitoring, for blocking USB traffic, right? But if I walk by somebody in a Starbucks and I'm able to rip your RIFID card and clone it and walk up to the lock and just say, beep, and walk right in, where's the love? Where's the protection? It's failing. The bigger problem is the fact that attackers don't see us the way we see ourselves. We walk up to these nice big concrete buildings, we use that RIFID card, we punch in an ID code, we scan our retinas, we use our fingerprints, we have a password and all this crazy stuff just to be able to park our car. But an attacker doesn't know, and therefore they don't take any of that stuff for granted. So they're going to stop, they're going to step back, and they're going to look at that big picture. They're going to take the time to profile your people on Facebook. They're going to take time to build trust relationships between your employees on LinkedIn. They're going to take time to learn what data you're leaking on Twitter. Then they're going to look at your stuff on Google Maps, and you're going to say, that's how I'm going to get in, right? All of these things have to play together, and if they don't play nicely, we're doing it wrong. If we're allowing the attackers the ability to put that picture together, it's like pieces of the puzzle. If we aren't scrambling it up well enough to make it hard to where they aren't able to walk through that open garage bay, then they're going to be able to come and get our stuff. And the biggest problem becomes it's out of sight, out of mind. If we set a policy, do we really enforce it? Who in here can say we enforce our policies 100%? Okay, thank you. Who in here says we enforce our policies at all? Okay, a couple hands. So you have real teeth then? I want to ask, do you have real teeth to your enforcement processes? Right? So, and here's the bigger thing to think about. We, as the good guys, right, we have to be right every time, all day, 100%. The bad guy only has to be right once, and we're done. So we have to change the way that we're thinking. We have to realize not only how important the policies are, but realize what happens when our policies aren't enforced, and what happens when it's kind of like, we'll go back to the parenting thing, right? If you tell your kid, do this or I'm going to spank you, and they don't do it, and you don't spank them, then the next time you say, do this or I'm going to put you in the corner, and like, yeah, right. Right? I learned that the hard way. 5 kids. By the time the 5th one came along, at least I started doing it somewhat right. Now I can just give her the look and she knows what's up. But it didn't start that way. My 18-year-old is still like, I'm just kicking my feet up on the couch and you're going to let me do whatever I want. Employees, our coworkers, our processes, all these things kind of fit under that same category as the children. If we don't enforce it, the policy is useless. Time for another story. This is another one of my favorites. Actually, this is probably my favorite of my entire career. Why? Because there was actually a level of excitement. So I was working, doing some consulting work, and this organization called, and they said, we want you to come and break into our data center. I was like, all right, so when you say break in, you mean tailgate? You mean I can rip your RIFID cards? You mean, like, define the scope. They said, no, really. We want you to break in. You can do anything short of physical damage to our assets or physically harming our employees. The guy even said, he said, you can shimmy through air conditioning ducts. if you want. Now, I'm a big guy. That's a little unrealistic for me. I wish at the time I'd had somebody smaller on my team to do that. But for the fact that they said, yeah, really, come and break in. Let's see what you got. I was like, all right, this is the first time in my career they encouraged me to bring lockpicks. Anybody in here do lockpicking? Those of you that don't, visit Lockpick Village. It's awesome, tons of fun. So growing up as a kid, my mom was married to a master locksmith. So I kind of got into this stuff pretty early on. I like to learn how locks work. As I explained with the martial arts and the other aspects of my life, I like learning how to manipulate a system to my own will, how to bend things to my will. It's kind of like bending the spoon, right? I like to make things work for me instead of working for them. So I packed my stuff up, packed up my lockpicks, packed up an entire, I like to dress up like the phone guy quite a bit. I packed up my blue kit, everything, all of my phone equipment, packed it and checked it at the airport. Well, all of this stuff, right? I had one little tool bag in my backpack. I have a backpack that'll carry a small person. And, I pack a few things in the carry-on. And of all of the wires and the weird-looking boxes and my pineapple and the strange electronics, they stopped me for the lockpicks. They didn't care about any of the electronic stuff. They stopped me for the lockpicks. What are these for? Well, what do you think they're for? They're lockpicks, right? I'm not going to lie to you. They're lockpicks. Well, what are you going to do with them? I'm going to make ice cream cones. Come on, I'm going to pick some locks. What's wrong with you? So getting past TSA, that was the first time that I ever got my freedom fondle. And if you haven't had one, that's great. And I normally have to pay extra for that kind of thing. But it was nice to actually get through there. And I said, come on, I mean, I'm about as Aryan and American as you can get. Do I really look like a terrorist? Here's the reason why I'm doing it. It's all valid. I'm a security pro. I'm supposed to have these things. Well, the cops were nice enough to say, yeah, let him go. And that was the end of that. So I get to my destination, and part of what they wanted to do was they wanted to have me break into this thing during non-business hours, right? Off-peak hours. So I was getting used to the time difference, and I thought, well, I'll just get there about 2 hours before the office opens up, and we'll see if we can get in, just take a stab at it. I had a whole week to do this, so I thought, yeah, first day, let's try it. Well, I was surprised when I got there that there was probably half a dozen employees just standing in the parking lot, just waiting. Like, the doors weren't open, they couldn't get in to do their work. It was 2 hours before open, and they already had people there. I was like, that's good dedication. But I noticed there was one guy by his motorcycle smoking a cigarette, and he saw my rental car and went back to his conversation and walked a little closer and smoking his cigarette and walked back to his conversation. And this guy actually paid attention. My site contact later on in the engagement, he said this guy actually realized there was somebody that didn't belong. So that tells me that our user awareness stuff, not only is this a perceptive individual, but the fact that we're spreading the word about things that just don't look right, it is working if we're doing it, but it has to be constant. So my early morning attack didn't work. So I asked, well, when is the next best time to do it? And he said, well, we have a 24-hour guard on site, so maybe try like 3 o'clock or so in the morning. Well, it's a rare thing for me, but I overslept. And by the time I got back to the site, it was about 5 o'clock in the morning. So I'm sitting here in my rental car, and I'm getting ready, I'm gathering up all my tools, and I'm getting ready to go hit this data center. And I get a tap on the window of my rental car. So I crack the window a little bit, and there's this Latino man standing there, and he said, hey, can I get a ride? I said, sorry, buddy, I'm working. I can't go anywhere. And no sooner than I finish that sentence, I hear the rear passenger door of my rental car trying to be opened. I look back, and there's one of his buddies standing there trying to get in the back seat of my car. I'm assessing the situation kind of rapidly, trying to figure out what I would do. And as I look out the windshield, there's a third guy standing in the front of the car trying to block me. I'm backed into the parking space, right? He's trying to block me from being able to get out. Now, again, I'm a big guy. I've been in martial arts for a long time. I'm a biker. I'm not scared of much. Had I been at home, had I been in my comfortable surroundings, it probably would have changed the outcome of this story a little bit. but no assessment is worth dying for or risking my safety or not coming home to my family. So I started the key up and gently nudged the gentleman in front of my car out of the way, decided to get out of Dodge. Now, I can't make this stuff up, right? First thing is, safety is important. If you're not doing it with safety first in mind, then we're doing something wrong. But the fact of the matter is, no assessment in the world is going to be worth me having to risk. I mean, I'd have gotten out of the car and given it to him before I'd risk having any kind of confrontation, just because at that point, you really don't know who you're dealing with. We've seen some crazy stuff in the news lately. I don't want to be another statistic or a casualty. Now for the beauty of the story. So I called my site contact. He wanted me to wait until early morning hours because he said, I'll sleep early, I'll get up, so in case something goes wrong, I'll be available. So I called him and I explained the situation. He said, all right, go ahead and relax. Don't worry about coming back for today. And I said, well, I'd really like to take a stab at getting in during business hours. I said, all right, go for it. So the way this was structured, it's a 2-level building. Data center's the top level. On the bottom level is a retail store with a door blocking, like protecting it with external access to the data center, right? So you have 2 entrances to the data center. I figured rather than trying to really pick the lock, let's get creative. Let's see what's going on the inside of this retail store. So I walk in, and again, I'm going to point to the doors in the back. If you check them out when you're going out, that little gap ends up to be the cascading failure and the way that I win the game. So I start thinking, well, how can we do this? How can we get in here? There's obviously a motion sensor on the inside, so that when you walk up to the door, it releases the lock. And on the outside, it's got the RFID, so you tap your card and it releases the lock. So I'm looking at what do I have that might be able to help me get in? And I am not sure why I had packed up one of the wire coat hangers from a dry cleaner, but well, let's go ahead and give that a try. Let's see if we can use this, slip it through that gap, wiggle it around a little bit. I've seen it work a couple times before. Stick it through there, wiggle it around, maybe it'll release the motion sensor on the other side of the door. Well, sadly, it didn't. So I drove around. There was a shopping center a couple blocks away from the Target, and I found a party supply store. And I walked in and I bought a bag of you've seen the long balloons they make balloon animals out of. Winning. If you do physical pen testing, add those to your arsenal. So I walked up, and I'm realizing there's people everywhere. How am I going to do this without them calling the cops on me? Because we want to have some level of undetectability if possible. So I went back to the party supply store, and I bought some canisters of CO2. Little tack in the top, pop the head of the balloon on, rapid deployment of the CO2, fairly quiet for a crowded area. And then I just pulled the canister out and let the balloon on the other side of the door. That becomes enough motion to trigger the motion sensor. Door pushes wide open. Get to the top of the steps. They had a similar thing, only this time the motion. So the reason that the balloons worked and the coat hanger didn't in this case is because rather than being a beam straight down and detecting motion in a line from the top, they came across. So I had to have something to break that beam to be able to let me through. When we get to the top of the steps to get into the data center, they had the opposite. So I had the beam coming down. So I stuck my coat hanger in there, wiggled it around, and it worked. I'm in the data center with a balloon and a coat hanger. These kind of things should not be happening. These are the kind of things that when we're designing physical security, we should have some sort of monitoring, some sort of alerting, some bells and whistles that are going off. When that door opens, there should be a ding in the knock that says, oh, hey, somebody just walked into our data center. We may have a problem. We have to think differently about how we're wrapping controls around our physical assets. And that's really, really hard. Now, it's hard enough. We've all who struggled with getting management to approve technical changes, right? Only one hand, really? So technical changes are one thing, but when you start to tell people, well, our physical assets are at risk as well, you start to get that pushback. People don't necessarily know what they're looking for, let alone how to fix it. And that becomes, again, part of the problem. I'm a big fan of Sun Tzu. When you see me speak, if you see me speak again, I usually have a lot of quotes from The Art of War, because nowhere in life have I seen a technical manual like the Principles from the Art of War, an ancient book, well, not really even a book, but an ancient manuscript that applies so well to so many facets of today's life. And if we don't know ourselves, how can we know our enemy? How do we know what to protect or how to protect it if we truly don't know what's important? That's why it's so important to have a second opinion. Work with a security partner. It's wonderful that we have our own in-house security teams, but if you aren't finding people who you can trust, who take a holistic approach to security and step back and take a look at the entire posture, how do we don't have any way to understand what we need to protect or what we need to change. These things get overlooked. We often ignore them. Most of the time, somebody is barking up to management saying, hey, we have a problem, and management sweeps it under the rug. But if we get somebody that is from outside, if we have a partner that we're actually able to work with that can change that perception, we can start to affect change in the organization. And that's why having a true security partner is so important. You'll never hear me, I'm never a salesman. I'm not here to sell any services. I think as long as you can find some sort of organization that just does security and knows how to do it well, oftentimes you'll be able to build a relationship with them to where you can have a long-term review of what your organization looks like from the standpoint of the attacker. But even more important, we have to take that a step further. You have to have regular assessments. We have to do regular vulnerability assessment, fairly regular penetration testing, and that does include our physical assets. We can't just be thinking, oh yeah, we got a nice 500-page Nessus scan, we're good. We have to have people that know security, that are weeding out those false issues, people that understand all facets of our posture and are able to help us build an appropriate plan to truly defend against relevant attacks, which is why I asked earlier about threat modeling. Threat modeling, surface mapping, this stuff is so important, and if we, as the organization, don't know how to do it, we have to find somebody who not only knows how, but is proficient and willing to do it. It's all too often that we're sitting here and like, oh, I've got absolutely everything patched, I'm good, I don't have to worry. But if that doesn't cover the entirety of the threat model, then we obviously still have gaping holes. And you're not going to stop a guy like me that looks for those things unless you're encompassing all of the vulnerabilities within an organization. Another story. So this is actually a picture taken from one of my assessments. I hope you can see it pretty well. It looks like you got a little stretch there. First thing I want to say is this is actually dangerous, so please, please, please do not try this at home. We had another customer that asked us to do a legitimate assessment, the second time in my career really where somebody said, yeah, come and let's see what you got. They wanted us to go and hit one of their assets in the field. And not only to do a vulnerability assessment, but we want to see how far you can get. We want a pen test too. Well, let me tell you that an Nmap scan over 9600 baud is painful. Painful. But I digress. So we found one of their assets. It was a random street corner, and you can't really see it from the background of this picture, but I was in the ghetto. I don't scare easily, but there are two other guys on the side. Like, we were really kind of concerned for our safety at this point. It was kind of sketchy. We walked up to this thing. It took me less than a minute to bust out my trusty lock picks and pick the lock, right? Busted the lock, then we find inside, nice little RJ45, a LAN cable, right? And there's a box plugged into this and plugged into another thing with another couple wires or whatever. So I unplugged what they had plugged in. I said, oh, thanks. It gave me a little nice access point. Let me in, right? So I fired up my machine and I start realizing, well, I really can't touch anything on the network. So something's going on. So let's do a little troubleshooting. And we realize that there's MAC filtering on this device. Well, thankfully, the manufacturer of this little device was kind enough to put the MAC address on there for me. Those of you who've done any kind of MAC spoofing know it takes about 10 seconds to change your MAC address. Poof, I'm now the device that you're asking to talk to. Thank you very much. So we start this about 9 o'clock in the morning, right? And my buddy and I are here until about 4:30 in the afternoon. And it's okay, I didn't starve. We brought plenty of monster drinks and Funyuns. But what was really disturbing was the fact that we were on the corner of a busy intersection, and again, in the middle of a not so nice area, so maybe they didn't realize that there was something out of place with the two white guys in a predominantly non-white area hacked into these utilities here. But what was more disturbing was 5 utility trucks passed, and not a one of them stopped to question. Not a one of them. Didn't even slow down. One of them almost even ran a red light looking at us, didn't even stop to question. None of the people stopped, no problems at all. Until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon when a cop who was obviously on patrol, nobody called him, he was just like, hey, well, I'll go see what's going on over here, maybe they have donuts. He pulled up to check us out and say, hey, what's going on here? Well, then I give him my get out of jail free card and tell him what's going on, and we had to call the site contact down. It got a little tense for a minute, but once he realized that we were authorized, everything was okay. The moral of the story here is that we trusted a 3-pin lock to protect an entire city's worth of utility. We also have our drivers passing us by in our utility trucks, obviously on their way to service calls, not paying any attention to the fact that there are these couple goofy-looking dudes plugged into their stuff. Asking questions, questioning the system, understanding what doesn't look right, having a baseline for normal. Again, all of these things playing into why and how physical security is so important. Now let me say, once we got plugged in, we got everything configured, I came across not even a firewall, it was a router with a factory backdoor on it. I got in and was able to literally change all of the root passwords on the devices across the entire span of this segment of their production network. And I did so, and then I called the guy who's supposed to be monitoring and managing these, and I explained to him what I did. He said, no, you didn't do that. There's no way, we got rid of all that. Go ahead and log into one for me. He hung up on me. People don't like it when you show them they have problems. Nobody wants to be told they have an ugly baby. Right? Lots of parents in here, so we all feel that pain. We have to change the way that our organization sees itself to understand the true posture of our security program. And then we have to have mechanisms in place to effect a relevant change and to truly address our threat model. There is no one security solution that's going to fit it all. There is no one program that's going to say, this is the way it should be. Every organization is different. Your business processes are different than mine. Your needs are much different than Joe's over here. And if we don't tailor a suitable plan, not only to our needs, but more importantly to our threat model, the program dissolves. It's almost like it wasn't there. I mean, you're telling me that a 3-pin lock is supposed to stop somebody who, first of all, it's bad enough if I just walk up and pry the plastic box open, but I was kind enough to pick the lock, and then to tell me that all the information that I need to own your stuff, a quick Google search returned the fact that there was this factory backdoor on the hardware that I was touching. There's a huge span of cascading failure there. We could have shut down utility access to this portion of town in a matter of, it took me a while. Again, discovery was the most painful part because that 9600 is slow. We take for granted network speeds that we have today. But, getting to that point and being able to touch so many important components of the network tends to be an issue when it's protected by something so small. I know I'm running out of time, so I should speed up here. This goes to what we're saying. Every organization is unique, right? What's good for you isn't necessarily good for me. We shouldn't necessarily think, oh yeah, my master lock is good to go when there's a weak link in the chain, right? It'd take me 3 seconds to bust through that. We have to be thinking about what's important. What are we protecting? I hear so many times in a penetration test, oh yeah, domain admin, I have domain admin. But that doesn't necessarily matter. If you truly have controls wrapped around the data that's important, sure, you have domain admin, you can lock people out, you can change passwords, and yeah, I gotta give it, you will eventually get some pretty damaging information. But the question is, to what extent do you have to go? How long is it gonna take you? And am I gonna be able to detect that and respond? Aha, key words of the day. Can I detect that and respond in a timely manner enough to be able to do something about it? Goes back to thinking like the attacker. If we're not paying attention to the things that are legitimately going to be attacked in our environment, then we're giving them the keys to the kingdom. Quick story. I got to speed up here. I was doing some work with a financial institution, and one of the things they wanted as their social engineering component was an after-hours walkthrough. They just wanted me to wander through this place. So I touched everything. If it wasn't locked, I opened it. Got into an office, door was wide open, so I sat down, started looking around, opened up some drawers, I found a key ring. And I asked my guide, like, what are these keys to? Well, those are to the front door. Okay, put them in my pocket and kept on walking. We get to the reception's desk, and I sit down. This is out in the wide open, in the lobby, and I start poking around, and one of my favorite things to do is look under keyboards, look under the phones, because what do we find under there? Thank you. I didn't find a password. What I found was much, much scarier. I found the phrase that they're supposed to give to the security company if an alarm ever goes off. So I have the keys to the kingdom and the password to say, no, don't worry, it's just me. I forgot to turn the alarm off, sorry. Again, the guy just shook his head, like, we're done. That's all you need, we're done. We have to do relevant things. If you have a lock on the door, lock it.
That's a shame that you have to say that.
Amen. Thank you. And do something with what you learn. It's not even so important that we have these types of assessments, but it's what you do with that information. If I'm standing up here running my mouth for an hour, I got 5 kids at home. I can do this all day long and nobody listens to me. If you're not listening to the things that I'm saying and doing something with this information, then we're affecting no change. Right? We have to make changes in how we're approaching physical security, security in general, but we have to do something different. We have to take the information that we're learning and we have to find out, how does this really pertain to me? I don't leave those keys in a desk drawer. I keep those protected by a 3-pin lock. Keep it simple, stupid. Just because we're talking complex problems doesn't mean a complex solution. Something as simple as detection, something as simple as, paying attention to our logs, something as simple as, not putting the front door keys in a desk drawer can help us to avoid these types of situations. It doesn't have to be hard. More importantly, guards, guns, and gates can and do work. They just can't be done alone. They have to be backed up with policies, and what do we do with policies? Thank you. Making sure everybody's not falling asleep. Only sometimes. It tends to leave a little burning sensation. And awareness works. Make sure we are, so I heard earlier, education, what's that, right? Well, we have to continue doing it. It is working. It's just a slow process. We have to continue to beat that into the heads of our users. We know that our users aren't always the sharpest knives in the drawer. But if we help them, if we continue to beat that into their mind, just like they're our children, eventually they'll start to figure it out. It's working. I've seen it. I've spent many times in the back of a cop car during physical engagements because people say, well, hey, wait a minute, you don't look like the HP printer guy. Or even worse, the printer guy's already here. Yeah, I meant the other printer. Fax, right, that's it. But we have to ask questions. We have to make some noise. We have to make sure that people are paying attention to what's going on. I was actually doing a Fortune 1000 company one time. We did a physical assessment, and I didn't pay enough attention to the structure of the building and I didn't realize that I parked my rental car in view of their smokers area. So when I get out and I put my hard hat on, I strap my tool belt on, and I start walking in, I go up to reception. Yeah, there's a problem with your phone lines. I'm here to diagnose it. We have to get this fixed, whatever. The lady was ready to let me in until the smokers came in. They said, hey, wait a minute. Telephone repair guys don't drive Toyotas? No, I suppose they don't. We have to know what doesn't look right. We have to be willing to say something. We have to know that we're not just turning a blind eye, that we're not afraid to ask questions. We have to make noise. If there's a door, it should be locked. If it opens, it should make a noise. If it makes a noise, somebody should do something about it. And regularly test and enforce your policies. I hope that you hear that a lot while you're here at Notacon, that we have to test and enforce the policies. Words on paper, words in the air, doesn't really mean much until we do something with or about it. So I'll let you read this. Just to basically say, do it. Security is good. It's not easy. If it's easy, it's not secure. That's why we work as users so hard to circumvent security practices. Because what do you mean I have to reach in my pocket and pull out a token to log in? Why isn't my password good enough? Things have changed. Attackers know how to brute force passwords. We have huge collections. Mine in itself, did you get a copy of Bones's password file? 69 gigs of passwords, and that was zipped. So there are huge password repositories out there. I'm willing to bet at least one of the passwords in every organization is in the password files that attackers are using. And every action has to have an opposite and equal reaction. If we wrap a control around something to just accept it, oh yeah, there's another firewall alert. Well, what are you going to do about it? Oh yeah, there's another entrance, another log entry in my SIM. Well, who's paying attention to that, and why aren't we investigating this stuff? We've gotten so comfortable with the complacency. We've gotten so comfortable to the thing's just annoying. We aren't paying attention to the fact that it only takes that once for an attacker to be able to slip past your defenses to be able to make the walls come crumbling down. Defense has to adapt. Don't be France. The Maginot line does not work. Right? Static defenses do not work. We have to constantly evaluate. We have to constantly change. We have to adapt with our threat model. And we have to adapt to our attackers. If you're protecting against something that's never going to happen, good for you, you're secure. But if you're not paying attention to the things that are going to happen, you will be owned if you haven't already been. And the bad guys can be anywhere. We've learned that inside attackers are some of the most dangerous. We don't necessarily have to worry about the guys on the outside. That's why we have those $500,000 firewalls we heard about earlier. It's the guys on the inside, whether they're malicious intentionally or just not prepared, that are going to really be able to bring down the walls to the kingdom. If I can trick one of your users into clicking on my dancing gnome, and I can launch a client-side attack, game over. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that's why we have to be sure that we're constantly adapting, that we're constantly changing, that we're constantly perceiving ourselves, not how we want to be seen, but how we actually look. And realize that detection and response are what matters. There's no more, you can no longer put solace in, yeah, I have antivirus and a firewall, I'm good. That stuff doesn't matter anymore. You can have the greatest antivirus in the world. You can have 20 firewalls stacked on top of each other. And it doesn't matter. There are ways to get around that. And unfortunately, almost all of those ways count on the people doing something wrong. So if we aren't considering that fact that we all have, until we make business fully autonomous and we eliminate the workforce, which I hope to God never happens, but until that day comes, we are always going to be vulnerable to some level. There's always going to be some issue. And if it just takes that one time, if I say, oh, hey, check out this YouTube video of a puppy kissing a kitty, somebody's going to want to click on it and see that. I like cute things. And security is not a part-time job. We can't do this 9 to 5. Especially, I heard earlier that BYOD is not unavoidable. Well, I disagree with that statement, because if you may not acknowledge that it's happening, but I guarantee you it's already happening. 90, 95, I would love to say 100, but that may not always be the case. I had my phone confiscated going on site not too long ago. But most of our sites, unless you're patting your employees down or you're building a Faraday cage inside your facilities, BYOD is already happening. What's to stop it? And that's it for me. I am the Grape Ape. Again, please interact on Twitter. My personal website, securicon.com, if you want to know more about the things that we do. I'll be here all weekend. I'd love to talk with you more about this and anything else security related. I love to break stuff, and hopefully together we can stop the bad guys from actually being successful. Talk tomorrow. Yeah, come see me CSurf tomorrow if you want to see web applications go from a web vulnerability to root in the box. So it'll be a lot of fun. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And I do have a couple minutes, so if there are any questions, you guys have been awful quiet. I appreciate the laughs and all, but if you have any questions or anything, you can field those or catch me offline.